The old house stood on a hill overlooking the town. It had been empty for years, and people said it was haunted. But a young woman named Sarah didn't believe in ghosts. She had just bought the house and she was excited to start a new life there. Sarah was a writer, and she was looking for a quiet place where she could work on her novel. The old house seemed perfect. It was isolated, and it had a big empty room that she could use as her office. When Sarah first arrived at the house, she was a little nervous. It was dark and dusty, and it smelled like mildew. But Sarah was determined to make it her home. She spent the next few days cleaning and fixing up the house. She painted the walls, she cleaned the carpets, and she even fixed the old fireplace. By the time she was finished, the house looked completely different. It was bright and airy, and it smelled like fresh paint and pine needles. Sarah was proud of what she had done. She couldn't wait to start writing in her new office. On her first night in the house, Sarah went to bed early. She was tired from all the work she had done, and she was looking forward to a good night's sleep. But as soon as she turned off the lights, she heard a noise. It sounded like someone was walking around in the house. Sarah sat up in bed and listened. The noise was coming from downstairs. Sarah was scared, but she didn't want to believe that there was a ghost in her house. She told herself that it was just the wind, or maybe a mouse. But the noise kept getting louder. It sounded like someone was running up and down the stairs. Sarah was terrified. She didn't know what to do. She grabbed her phone and called the police. The police arrived a few minutes later. They searched the house, but they didn't find anything. They told Sarah that it was probably just her imagination. But Sarah knew what she had heard. She knew that there was Omion in the house with her. The police left, and Sarah was alone again. She was too scared to go back to sleep. She sat up in bed and waited for the sun to come up. As soon as it was light out, she got dressed and went downstairs. She searched the house, but she didn't find anything. She even went into the basement, but it was empty. Sarah was starting to think that she was going crazy. She didn't know what to do. She was afraid to stay in the house, but she didn't have anywhere else to go. Sarah decided to go for a walk. She needed to get out of the house for a while. She walked down the hill and into the town. She went to the library and looked up the history of the house. She wanted to know if anyone had ever died there. The librarian told her that the house had been built in the 1800s. She said that a family had lived there, but they had all died in a fire. Sarah was even more scared than she was before. She didn't know what to do. She was afraid to go back to the house, but she didn't have anywhere else to go. Sarah went back to the house. She was scared, but she was determined to face whatever was there. She walked through the house, but she didn't see anything. She went upstairs and into her office. She sat down at her desk and tried to write, but she couldn't concentrate. She kept thinking about the fire and the family that had died in the house. Sarah decided to take a break. She went downstairs and made herself a cup of tea. She sat in the living room and looked out the window. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. But Sarah couldn't enjoy it. She was too scared. She went back upstairs and into her office. She sat down at her desk and tried to write, but she still couldn't concentrate. She kept thinking about the fire. She decided to go back to the library. Maybe she could find out more about the family that had died in the fire. Sarah went to the library, but the librarian wasn't there. Sarah was disappointed. She wanted to know more about the family that had died in the fire. She wanted to know if they were still in the house. Sarah went back to the house. She was scared, but she was determined to find out what was going on. She walked through the house, but she didn't see anything. She went upstairs and into her office. She sat down at her desk and started to write. She wrote about the fire and the family that had died in the house. She wrote about how scared she was. She wrote about how she didn't know what to do. As she was writing, she heard a noise. It sounded like someone was crying. Sarah stopped writing and listened. The noise was coming from downstairs. Sarah was terrified, but she knew she had to find out what was going on. She went downstairs and followed the sound of the crying. It was coming from the basement. Sarah was even more scared than she was before, but she kept going. She opened the door to the basement and went inside. The basement was dark and cold. Sarah could hear the crying, but she couldn't see anything. She took a step forward, and then she saw it. There was a light in the corner of the basement. Sarah walked towards the light. As she got closer, she could see that it was a fire. The fire was small, but it was enough to light up the room. Sarah saw a figure sitting in front of the fire. It was a woman. She was wearing a long white dress, and her hair was long and black. She was crying. Sarah didn't know what to do. She was scared, but she felt sorry for the woman. She walked towards her and said, "Hello?" The woman looked up. She was beautiful, but she was also very sad. She said, "Who are you?" Sarah said, "My name is Sarah. I just moved into this house." The woman said, "I know. I've been watching you." Sarah was surprised. She said, "You're the go, see?" The woman nodded. She said, "My name is Emily. I died in this house a long time ago." Sarah said, "I'm sorry." Emily said, "It's not your fault. It was an accident." Sarah said, "What happened?" Emily said, "There was a fire. I was trapped in the house. I couldn't get out." Sarah said, "I'm so sorry." Emily said, "It's okay. I'm used to it now. I've been here for a long time." Sarah said, "I don't understand. Why are you still here?" Emily said, "I'm waiting for someone." Sarah said, "Who?" Emily said, "My husband. He died in the fire too. I'm waiting for him to come back for me." Sarah said, "I'm so sorry." Emily said, "It's okay. I know he'll come back someday." Sarah said, "I hope so." Emily smiled. She said, "Thank you for talking to me. It's been a long time since I've talked to anyone." Sarah said, "You're welcome." Emily said, "I should go. It's getting late." Sarah said, "Okay." Emily stood up and walked towards the fire. She disappeared into the flames. Sarah was alone again. She didn't know what to think. She had just talked to a ghost. She couldn't believe it. She went back upstairs and into her office. She sat down at her desk and tried to write, but she still couldn't concentrate. She kept thinking about Emily. She felt sorry for her. She was trapped in the house waiting for her husband to come back. Sarah decided to go to bed. She was tired, and she needed to think about everything that had happened. She got into bed and turned off the lights. She closed her eyes and tried to go to sleep, but she couldn't. She kept hearing Emily's voice. She kept seeing her face. Sarah sat up in bed. She couldn't sleep. She got out of bed and went to the window. She looked out at the town. It was quiet and peaceful. She wished she could be like everyone else. She wished she didn't know about Emily. She wished she could just forget about everything that had happened. But she knew she couldn't. She knew she would never be able to forget about Emily. She knew she would always be haunted by her story. Sarah stayed at the window for a long time. She didn't know what to do. She was lost and confused. Finally, she went back to bed. She closed her eyes and tried to go to sleep. Abshi, Ekhan Gulper, Debidi, Ayansh. Part 2. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling different. She wasn't as scared as she had been the night before. She felt like she had a new understanding of the house and its history. She knew that Emily was still there, but she wasn't afraid of her anymore. She knew that Emily was just waiting for her husband to come back. Sarah got out of bed and went downstairs. She made herself breakfast, and then she went into her office. She sat down at her desk and started to write. She wrote about Emily and the fire. She wrote about how she felt about everything that had happened. As she was writing, she heard a noise. It sounded like someone was knocking on the door. Sarah stopped writing and went to the door. She opened it and saw a man standing there. He was tall and handsome, and he had a kind face. The man said, "Hello, my name is Thomas. I'm looking for Emily." Sarah smiled. She knew who he was. She said, "I know who you are. Emily is waiting for you." Thomas was surprised. He said, "You know about Emily?" Sarah nodded. She said, "I talked to her last night." Thomas said, "You did? What did she say, Sarah?" H said, "She said she's waiting for you. She said she knows you'll come back someday." Thomas smiled. He said, "I know I will. I've been looking for her for a long time." Sarah said, "She's in the basement. She's by the fire." Thomas said, "Thank you." He went inside the house and down to the basement. Sarah watched him go. She knew that Emily and Thomas would be together again. She was happy for them. Sarah went back to her office and started to write. She wrote about Emily and Thomas. She wrote about how they were finally together again. She wrote about how she felt about everything that had happened. She wrote about how she was no longer afraid of the house. She knew that Emily and Thomas would be there, but she wasn't afraid. She knew that they were happy. Sarah finished writing and she felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She was no longer afraid of the house. She knew that it was her home. She went downstairs and made herself a cup of tea. She sat in the living room and looked out the window. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. Sarah smiled. She was happy. She was finally home. Sarah spent the next few days exploring the town and getting to know the people who lived there. She learned about the history of the town and the stories of the people who had lived there. She also learned about the fire that had killed Emily and Thomas. Sarah discovered that the fire had happened a long time ago, but it was still a vivid memory for the people of the town. They told her stories about Emily and Thomas and how much they loved each other. They also told her about the fire and how it had destroyed their lives. Sarah felt a connection to Emily and Thomas. She felt like she knew them, even though she had never met them. She understood their love for each other and their pain at being separated. Sarah decided to write a story about Emily and Thomas. She wanted to tell their story to the world and let people know about their love and their loss. She also wanted to tell people about the fire and how it had affected the town. Sarah started writing the story, and she quickly became engrossed in it. She spent hours researching the fire and the people who had been affected by it. She also spent time talking to the people of the town and listening to their stories. The more Sarah learned, the more she realized how much the fire had affected the town. It had destroyed homes and businesses, and it had taken the lives of many people. But it had also brought the community together. The people of the town had come together to help each other and to rebuild their lives. Sarah's story became a tribute to the people of the town and their resilience in the face of tragedy. It also became a love story about Emily and Thomas and their enduring love. Sarah finished writing the story, and she sent it to a publisher. The publisher loved the story, and they decided to publish it. The story was a success, and it touched the hearts of many people. People from all over the world read the story, and they were moved by it. They were also inspired by the love of Emily and Thomas. Sarah's story helped to keep the memory of Emily and Thomas alive. It also helped to heal the wounds of the fire. Sarah continued to live in the old house, and she continued to write stories. She never forgot about Emily and Thomas, and she always remembered the lessons she had learned from them. Years passed, and Sarah continued to live in the old house. She became a successful writer, and her stories were loved by people all over the world. She never forgot about Emily and Thomas, and she always remembered the lessons she had learned from them. Sarah's stories were not just about love and loss. They were also about hope and resilience. They were about the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity. Sarah's stories touched the hearts of many people, and they helped to make the world a better place. She received letters from people all over the world telling her how her stories had changed their lives. Sarah was grateful for the success she had achieved, but she never forgot the people who had helped her along the way. She was always willing to help other writers, and she was always grateful for the support she had received from her readers. Sarah's life was not always easy, but she never gave up on her dreams. She always believed in the power of hope, and she always believed that things would get better. Sarah's story is an inspiration to us all. It shows us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. It shows us that even when we have lost everything, we can still find the strength to carry on. Sarah's story is a reminder that love is the most powerful force in the universe. It is a force that can overcome any obstacle, and it is a force that can last forever. One day, Sarah received a letter from a young woman who had read her story about Emily and Thomas. The woman wrote that she had been deeply touched by the story and that it had given her hope in a time of great loss. The woman wrote that her husband had died in a car accident a few months earlier and that she had been struggling to cope with his death. She said that Sarah's story had helped her to see that love is eternal and that it can never be taken away from us. Sarah was deeply moved by the woman's letter. She realized that her stories were not just entertaining, but that they were also helping people to heal and to find hope in their lives. Sarah decided to write to the woman and tell her how much her letter had meant to her. She also told her that she was not alone in her grief and that there were many people who cared about her. The woman wrote back to Sarah and told her that her letter had given her the strength to carry on. She said that she would never forget the kindness that Sarah had shown her. Sarah and the woman became friends, and they stayed in touch for many years. Sarah's friendship with the woman was a reminder of the power of love and compassion. Sarah continued to write stories, and she continued to touch the hearts of people all over the world. She never forgot about Emily and Thomas, and she always remembered the lessons she had learned from them. Sarah lived a long and happy life, and she died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 90. Her stories continue to be read and loved by people all over the world. Sarah's story is a reminder that love is the most powerful force in the universe. It is a force that can overcome any obstacle, and it is a force that can last forever. Sarah's story is an inspiration to us all. It shows us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. It shows us that even when we have lost everything, we can still find the strength to carry on. Sarah's story is a reminder that we are all connected to each other and that we are all capable of love and compassion. Sarah's story is a gift to the world, and it will continue to touch the hearts of people for many years to come.
Subscribe to my channel.